often bring up when they're talking to me about making a Mary Poppins is the scene in Mr. Banks where Walt Disney, played by Tom Hanks, takes Pamela Travers to Disneyland. Never happens. Just doesn't happen. It's never even planned to happen.
Welcome to this,
as I expected, Mary Poppins, practically perfect in every way,
episode of the Maza's Musings podcast. Today, I have a very special guest for the podcast that I'm very excited about. His name is Todd James Pierce. He is the author of Making Mary Poppins, among other books. He's also been on several documentaries and series about Disney and putting together Disney projects and Disney parks, including 2020 and ABC specials, the Disney Plus series, Making the Attraction. He's also been on the History Channel's How Disney Built America. Really just a great wealth of information. I'm very excited to have him with me today. I really appreciate that he dove into some of the things that are actually in the book and really didn't shy away into generalities. He really wants people to have an idea of what's happening in these stories. And for everything that he talked about, there are 2 or 3 other like great nuggets. So I hope you enjoy getting this little taste of Making Mary Poppins, and then you go out and buy it because I've had a chance to read it. It's an excellent book, really an easy read. He makes sure that you have all of the knowledge about this kind of stuff, even if you don't have the knowledge. You know, if you're not a musician or you're not a film aficionado, you're going to understand this book and the ins and outs of everything that went into it. So we'll get into the book in a minute. And of course, one of the major parts of Mary Poppins is that we love to laugh, right? So let's laugh with Megan's Cuckoo Bananas Joke of the Week.
And now it's time for Megan's
Cuckoo bananas, joke.
Hi, Megan.
Hi!
Do you have a joke for us today?
Yes!
Okay. And what is your joke?
What do you call a witch at the beach?
I don't know. What do you call a witch at the beach?
A sandwich! Sandwich. It's a sandwich.
Oh my goodness.
It's a sandwich.
Alrighty.
Yum.
Time to say goodnight.
Sandwich. Eat that sandwich.
Time to say goodnight.
Yum. Good night. Sandwich. Eat the sandwich. Yum. It's all gone.
All right. Well, we had our joke now, and now it's time to get into talking some Poppins.
Donald, wake up! It's showtime! Don't forget the orchestra!
Ah, there you are. And just in time.
Mom says there's even more magical stuff now.
For those of you standing, please hold on to the handrails throughout our journey and stay clear of the doors.
Hang on to them hats and glasses, cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness. And here we go!
All right. Well, I am very excited to have a very special guest with me today. He is actually the author of this book. We have Todd James Pierce, who is the author of Making Mary Poppins, among many other projects that he's been a part of or spearheaded. And so welcome, Todd. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about you and your journey to this point of writing this book.
So, well, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. And so my journey into writing this book is I've been trying to kind of isolate topics for a while that I thought would make good standalone book-length projects. And so before I started working on projects that were related to Disney. I had a regular life as a normal writer and wrote normal writer things. And then about 15 or so years ago, a while ago, I took a crack at a Disney book. My grandmother had worked at Disneyland when I was growing up, and I spent an ungodly amount of time there, where she introduced me to people. This was this is also in the '80s, so it's a long time ago. She introduced me to people like Herb Ryman and John Hench and others who were kind of key designers, both for Disneyland and then Disney World, which is more your way. And in the '80s, these people were really not very well known. It was just at the time where fan groups mostly were pulling back the curtain. So in the evolution of how Disney communities work over the last 40 years, there was the fan groups first that started to pull back the curtain on who the designers were in the late '80s and early '90s. And from there, it shifted over to some magazines like the E-Ticket or Persistence of Vision. And then there was a period in the late 90s and probably up through about 2010 where a lot of things were blog centric. And then we went into that period of podcasting, which is why we're here today. And things are mostly now podcast and video driven, is what I think, in terms of how community discussions work about these topics online. But during those early years, I had a chance to talk to some key people. I would really like to go back and knock my younger teenage self on the head and tell my younger self to, maybe bring a tape recorder with you, things like that. But in there, I got a hold of some interesting stories, the stories that I enjoyed back then. And I was between books in the early 2000s, and I pitched some magazine ideas essentially to my agent. And one of the magazine ideas turned into the first book that I did on Disney. From talking with my grandmother and her friends and some early designers, I had found out that there was a very early president of Disneyland that I'd worked with Walt on the development of Disneyland and the opening of Disneyland that turned out to be a con man. He had faked his college degrees. He did some crazy things. He burned down some houses that Disney didn't own while Disneyland was being built as a way of clearing land. He gave away merchandising rights to his friends, which were valued at millions of dollars. There were 2 lawsuits that came out of this. He was fired. They had to buy out his contract. So I knew that there was this interesting bit of craziness that had happened as Disneyland was being built. And so when I was between books and I was moving across country, I told my agent I couldn't work on a book this summer because I was just going to be really frustrated if I had to focus on something for the day and then pack things up for the next 2 days and then drive and then focus on something and then unpack. And so he said, give me some magazine ideas. And so I gave him 3 magazine ideas. I remember 2 of them. I don't remember the third one. And one of them was I think I could probably track down the people that I'd worked with. This person, his name was C.V. Wood, Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood, and maybe put together something from an oral history that might be a magazine piece. And he sent those proposals out to a number of magazines, and there was one magazine that was interested in that one in particular. And so I spent my summer, this was the summer of 2005, so more than 15 years ago, more like 20 years ago, 2005. So I spent the summer of 2005 going around and talking to any of the remaining art directors, architects, and engineers who had worked on the Disneyland project during that time. And I learned a lot from that as well. And by the end of the summer, for what was, probably needed to be a 4,000 to 5,000 word magazine piece, I had 120 pages, and I was still lying to myself. So I was I can shrink this down. I can get this down to 15 pages or something like that. But I was having a really good time, and there was a good story there. And then once I was done with that, I did some other. I've done other books kind of concurrently with the Disney stuff. But once I was done with that, I was like, I had a really great time talking to these people. Some of whom were in their 80s, 90s. There was one that I talked to for that project that was 101. That I had a really great time doing this. And also in 2005, the animators from the classic Disney features did have kind of a public life. The people that worked on the parks didn't yet. It was coming. It would come in a few years, but there was not a whole lot of light being shown on them. And the light that was being shown on them was really just centered around a few people that worked with the parks. And so like I was looking at this as like, I bet there's like more interesting stuff that's going on here. And so at that point I was kind of hooked. So I did that book. I did long story, but I did a biography on an animator named Kimball. And then I'm the Mary Poppins book is the next one that's just coming out.
So would it be safe to call you, I guess, would it be safe to call you a Disney adult?
That is an excellent question. Well, I I I have I have no qualms at all about being a Disney adult, but I do think that Disney adult has a very specific definition. And I think the reason that it's contentious today is because a, a lot of the older crowd doesn't really understand how the younger cohort experienced media when they were growing up. And so the Disney adult, I believe, is a very specific thing. And it's confusing, I think, for people who are like in their 50s or 60s or 70s. And so the Disney adult let me put it this way. So in the 1990s, Disney becomes very conscious that it wants to take on companies like Nickelodeon. And so Disney is going to consciously move towards being a lifestyle company. It'll be more successful at this about 20 years later. But it understands that the avenue into this is not to go after people who are then 30 years old, because it's kind of hard to get them. Their lifestyles are established, but to go after the tween market and then try to follow them forward. And so if you go back and look at the 1990s and early 2000s with the DComs and Waverly Place and all the things that were happening on the Disney Channel, these are marketed to a very specific and very narrow age cohort, and it's done really successfully. And so if you're talking to people of a certain age, like they will almost all have memories of Hannah Montana and the Wizards and so on. And so within this group, being a Disney fan meant something different than it did to people who were older. Being a Disney fan for this age cohort meant it was something that you plugged into most every night at home. There was also Radio Disney that took the Disney Channel actors and then often put them on air with music. And so there was a number of ways that through synergy, it became a multifaceted way to connect into a certain fan base, and was very successful. And so I think that people who are older than that look at Disney as like, oh, Disney, yeah, there's a movie every 3-4 months or something like that, and an animated film every couple of years, and maybe every summer or every other summer we go to the parks for a day or two, or if you're in Florida for a few days or something like that. But they didn't see it as a lifestyle company. It wasn't something they were accultured to. And so like when this younger group gets a little bit older, they're very interested in Disney, which I think is confusing for people who are older than them that are not in this bubble. And this is generally what is termed the Disney adults, I think. It's like this really narrow definition. It's this group that's probably now in their 30s. And if they don't have kids, but they have stable jobs, so they have the the ability to raise a family, but they choose to do other things. And if Disney's one of the things they choose to do, I think it's confusing or maybe even frustrating for an older crowd because they didn't see how this was really being woven into them in the same way that I think maybe music or sports fandom was woven into earlier generations. Like, I don't think any, like, there's no such thing as like a Dodgers adult or anything like that. Um, but yeah, so I don't think I'm the right age group, but I think I have a lot of the same shared interests. But I do think that the Disney adult has a very, very specific definition of who who it's trying to target, or if, to put it in pejorative terms, who it's trying to marginalize with that name.
Fair enough. All right. So you talked a little bit about the inspiration that you had, and there was kind of a natural in there when you started going into the research of the Disneyland book. But what was it about Mary Poppins that drew you in? And when I told people that I was going to be speaking with you and that this book was what this book was about, the reaction was, "Oh, so like Saving Mr. Banks, the movie," and it was just like, "Well, that's a small part of what's going on here." But what was it that drew you into this particular story and was just like, "There's a story here to tell"?
Yeah, so maybe a few things. So this is one of the Disney movies that I did not see when I was really young. I pro also, again, before VHS. So I probably had chicken pox or whatever the month it was being re-released out of the movies. I'm not old enough to have seen it when it was I wasn't born yet when it was first released. And so I didn't see it till I was young teenager. And I thought it was a very emotionally affecting movie. I felt a much stronger connection to it than I did with a lot of other Disney live action. So there was that. I thought it was an extremely well produced movie, especially compared to some of the other titles from the 1960s. So there was that. And then I was able to spend time with Dick and Bob while they were alive. And I also had some of the things that they had written in the 1970s. They have this low period in terms of production. So after Walt dies, Disney World's already kind of moving forward. Roy Disney kind of puts on the brakes and then decides that they're going to move forward with it. But once that project is over or nearly over, Disney sheds a lot of key people that were very close to Walt. And one of the reasons that I think this is done, though, not overtly talked about, is that the new managers, the new executives at Disney, Don Tatum, Card Walker, and then just a little bit below that, people like Ron Miller and Dick Nunes, I think they needed to clean the slate a little bit. That if you had people that were very publicly known as Walt's people and used to spend time in Walt's office just talking about stuff, it's very hard to move the company in a different direction if that group of people continually comes out and explains what they think Walt would have done. And so during that period, the Sherman Brothers move away from Disney. They work on other films. They work on Tom Sawyer. They work on some of the Peanuts movies. And after that's over, they don't have a whole lot going on. And during that time, they had started to try to write about their experiences early in life. They didn't get very far, but I had some of that material, and I thought, like, okay, so there's some breadcrumbs here back to a point where they were thinking about this stuff 10 years after it happened. And it was very clear in those documents how they were thinking about it. And I thought, okay, I can start to build out with some of the stuff. I also had some interviews and had some other interviews by other people that hadn't been published. And so I thought I could really start to build something interesting out here around the film. I always think that stories, in terms of how we think of them, track change in people and historical figures. And I could see how the movie Mary Poppins transformed the lives of the Shermans, but also other people, including Dick Van Dyke, who had been in 2 movies before this, but this was the first time he was really a lead and at a big premiere, and Julie Andrews, who had been a star in the West End and in Broadway, but hadn't been in film yet. And so this is very transformative. It's even transformative for Walt. In 1964, while the sets are being finished for Mary Poppins, he sends in April a person named Bob Foster, a lawyer from Disneyland, down to Florida to look for specifically 5,000 acres of land, maybe up to 10,000, depending on what the parcel sizes are, where they're going to put Disney World. It's only because that Mary Poppins is such a financial success for the company that Walt's able, a few months later, to tell Bob Foster that he wants to get more land and it can now be a bigger project. So without Mary Poppins, that dream of really building something very large in Florida would never have happened. It would have been a bigger version of Disney World, but it probably would have ended up being a lake, some outdoor recreation, a couple hotels, maybe 3, and the theme park. But it's only because they got 27,000 acres that Disney World is what it is today. So it's even transformative for the life of Walt or the life of the Disney company as well. So I knew that there was a lot of very positive change that came out of this project, and that's what I wanted to track in writing about it.
Now, without Mary Poppins, perhaps there is no Disney World as we know it now. And obviously, without the Sherman Brothers, there wouldn't have been Mary Poppins the way that we know it now.
Absolutely.
And you start this book out really examining the Sherman Brothers years before, any thought of Mary Poppins whatsoever. Why did you think that it was? Why did you feel that it was important to add this background, this context, into this story that is, focused on the production of this film?
You faded out. I only got maybe a third of the question. Can you pitch me the question again?
Sure. So, all right. So you start out with the book very early on with the early lives of the Shermans. And I'm very interested as to why you found that to be so important that you dedicated a fair amount of this book to the early lives of the Shermans, well before anything to do with Mary Poppins. Why was that information, do you feel, important for people to have to appreciate what happens later on as they move into their relationship with Disney and into Mary Poppins?
So I think there's like a few important things that set up some later key events for Mary Poppins. Part of Mary Poppins, in terms of how they imagine it, is based on their childhood. What I think's not always clear to people who have only seen the movie and not read the books is that Mary Poppins, the book series, is really a series of short stories to read to kids at bedtime. It would take maybe 10, 15, or maybe 20 minutes to read any of those stories out loud to your kids. And they're self-contained. There is no through line. And particularly in 1964, when the movie comes out, the common concept for how movies are going to be structured is that they need a linear plot in which tension escalates over time that brings us to culminating action at the end of the film. There's nothing in the books that is going to work like that. There's characters that return, but it's a bunch of anecdotes and charming stories, and there's no through line that connects it all, even with Mary Poppins. And so the Sherman Brothers need to invent the main story of Mary Poppins. And part of that relies on their experiences with their father, when they're very young. Part of that relies on them being familiar with the teen market in the 1950s. So before they get involved with Disney in terms of TV movies and feature films, they were writing novelty rock songs, pop songs for a teen audience. And I think some Disney fans are familiar with their work with Annette. And during this period of the Disney company, there are two music divisions. There's a music division that does pop music or music to be played at home, and there's a film music division. The the more important one is the film music division. The Shermans, even when they start with Disney for years, aren't involved with the film music division at all. They've been brought on board because they are able to write songs in Annette's range, which is fairly narrow, musical range. On the Mickey Mouse Club, where she gets her start, she's a dancer, she's not a singer. And so they're able to kind of trick that out so it works well in terms of Annette's voice. But very they're very aware of what's happening in the world of teenagers in the 50s and the 60s. And so I like to think of, part of the secret sauce of Mary Poppins is that it is a film set in Edwardian England. So it's not set in America and it's not set in the 1960s, but it's a story about America in the 1960s, just very, very well disguised. And part of that relies on the Sherman Brothers having a familiarity with that audience. And so if you were to see a movie like Rebel Without a Cause, which I think was released in 1955 and stars James Dean, it's a movie in which James Dean feels alienated from his father. And at the end of the movie, when James Dean's father, who in the film, his name is Frank Stark thinks that his son has been killed. And because of that, or that sensation of loss, Frank Stark has a transformation that brings him back into the family where he's willing to struggle to find a place inside the world of his son. James Dean is older than the kids in Mary Poppins, but this is basically the template for the story that the Sherman Brothers invent for Mary Poppins, with comedy and whimsy and no guns. And so the Sherman Brothers are able to do one very, very smart thing, along with one other person at Disney, Don DeGrody. They're able to make a contemporary story out of a historical fantasy. And so even though people are singing and dancing and there's animation, the core of this movie is a reflection of what's happening in other teen exploitation films or teen movies at the time. It's a story about how the kids feel alienated by both of their parents in this movie. And it's primarily the story of Mr. Banks's redemption, in the same way that Rebel Without a Cause is the redemption of the father in that movie. But most of the people going to the movie don't understand that. Most of the people going to the movie in 1964, or when it goes into wide release in 1965, see this as a Disney musical fantasy set in a historical period and leave the theater confused, I think, as to why it's so emotionally affecting. It's emotionally affecting because their guard is down, because it does have songs and animation, but it's the story of what was happening at the American breakfast table, about generational division that was really writ large for the first time in our country in the 50s and 60s. So it's a metaphor for what's happening across the country. And parents mostly don't go see Rebel Without a Cause. That's for a teen audience. But parents will go see Mary Poppins. And so they get brought into this film that then decodes what's happening in some of their own lives and are deeply affected by it, but don't understand the connecting material that has that produces that emotional punch. And so, that's kind of what's going on with the Sherman Brothers. I want to get a long take with them. And also, like, Disney in the kind of like the official stories or the DVD behind the scenes footage. It's all about success. And there's nothing wrong with that. And, that's a very positive thing. And that's very honest. This is a very successful film. But nobody really talks about how much these two guys struggled. Dick, who is mostly the composer, is working for the Al Dick Artificial Flower Company. He's going to home shows to demonstrate how people can put together artificial arrangements at their houses. He's doing this on morning talk TV. He's spending his days going around to dentists and doctors' offices to make artificial flower arrangements for them. And Bob, who is mostly the lyricist, they kind of, they both contribute to both sides of the music, but he's mostly the lyricist. He had wanted to be a novelist in order to find time for his writing. He rented a kid's playhouse to live in the backyard of someone else's house with a dirt floor, a hose for water. All of his meals would have been out, and he would have gone to the YMCA to shout. And so both of these people had a lot of struggle before they found success, and I wanted to include that as well.
Now, with the struggles, obviously they were doing a lot of different and new things in this movie, both from a script development and story development standpoint, especially with like bringing music so much into the storytelling process, whereas previously, especially the Sherman Brothers were familiar with, inserting music into a story that was already existing. And then beyond that, the actual production, and there's so many things that were going on with that. One of the things that I really enjoyed when I was reading this was, now first, I'm not a musician and I'm not a music or film aficionado. But I really appreciated the approach that you took in explaining all of this in a way that also that made me understand and appreciate what the challenges were and how they were approaching them. And I'm curious as to your approach to that kind of material without making it feel like you're talking down to, the layperson, so to speak.
Well, I'm not a musician either. I can play a couple instruments, but I'm not a musician, and I've never worked on film productions. So I think, like with anything like this, I feel like once I have language where I would like it to be explained to me, as being outside of these worlds, like that's probably pretty good language to include in books. I like to think of books as inviting people into a world they are interested in so they understand it better, but also so that they have a secondhand vicarious sensation of, maybe watching at a slight distance as these things happen, so that they're peripherally involved in all of this as well. And so for me, finding the language that takes out some of the technical terms and the jargon is one of the ways to use writing to increase that sense of closeness when you're reading a book with what's happening in the world of the story.
Now, also, again, talking about challenges, developing the script was a challenge, and of course, there's a movie about it. There's legend about it with Pamela Travers. But as I said before, that's part of this book. But I'd imagine there's so much there. How do you balance? You don't want this to be a book about that, but you still want to make sure that you are making sure that you. There were times where I'm feeling the Sherman Brothers frustration here. I'm feeling for the boys here.
Yeah. So, and in terms of like 20th and 21st century storytelling, storytelling is kind of an art form that evolves in ways, it evolves each 50, 100 years to meet audiences where they are. And so one of the things that we, as living in 2025, or if this airs later, 2026, understand about storytelling is that we are supposed to follow trouble. That's one of the first things that readers and viewers will look for in a story, and if they can find that, they know how to follow the narrative of what's being told them. If they don't see that, there can be some confusion really early on, and so we think of stories in terms of what the troubles are, and so when there is trouble, um, in terms of kind of like my mental process, if I can't figure out what the tension is in a historical story, I I have a sense it's not going to do very well. It's going to be confusing and frustrating for people, or they'll feel like they're just absorbing data. So that's probably not a great one to spend a couple of years on. Um, but your question had a very smart second part, and I forget what that was now because I'm getting old.
Oh, yeah, no, it was just, how do you, make sure that you're balancing that with the rest of this story here?
Got it.
There's a lot to get through, but you want to make sure that you are, really capturing what a process that was within the process.
Yeah. So, and part of that was also you'd mentioned Saving Mr. Banks, and so there are many
Mhm.
things in Saving Mr. Banks that are true, and there are some things in Saving Mr. Banks that are dramatic approximations to present a real underlying tension, but are done so with a bit of creative license. And so I
Mhm.
haven't seen Saving Mr. Banks in a while, and I didn't look at it while I was writing this book for that reason. But there are so one of the things that people often bring up when they're talking to me about making a Mary Poppins is the scene in Mr. Banks where Walt Disney, played by Tom Hanks, takes Pamela Travers to Disneyland. Never
Right.
happens. Just doesn't happen. It was never even planned to happen. Just just doesn't happen. So I was trying to kind of push through that, and there are some really interesting things that happen in that same time space, but it's not that. So I Walt is not very good at explaining his underlying motivation in terms of kind of abstract direction with language clearly.
Mhm.
Just not his strengths area. He's much better at other things. And so I think that Walt understood that he was a strong-willed figure who was mostly used to getting his way with maybe a couple of questions or checks along the way. And this was Pamela Travers' personality as well. And I think that he probably had the good sense to realize that if he and Pamela were going to spend a week together, they were just going to come to blows and this would all explode. And so Walt doesn't take Pamela to Disneyland. He gets the head of the story department, a guy named Bill Dover, to do it for him. So the day
Mhm.
before she arrives, she's going to arrive the day before Easter. She can arrive on a Saturday. He writes a letter on the Friday to Pamela, like, welcome. And um, Mr. Dover here is going to take you over to Disneyland for lunch. And that's a key detail for lunch on Sunday, if you'd like to see it. And I think anybody who'd spent any time with Pamela knows that probably American theme parks really aren't going to be her thing. And this is one of the things that I don't think the people that made Saving Mr. Banks really understood. That what was going on here was a really smart bit of a manipulation. Pamela Travers is worried that Walt Disney doesn't have the resources to make a historical drama. And so what he's going to do, he's going to send Pamela over to Disneyland with Bill Dover. Bill Dover and the Sherman Brothers and Don DeGrady and Bill Walsh aren't company executives, so they can't make binding deals. They can talk about stuff,
Right.
but they aren't accountable for what it is they're talking about in the same way that Walter Roy would have been. So he sends Pamela over to Disneyland for lunch on Sunday, which is Easter Sunday. These things no longer happen at the parks and haven't for decades. And no, didn't really ever happen at Disney World, but only out at Disneyland. During the early years, there were community activities at Disneyland. And so on Easter weekend for years, on Saturday, there was the uh, dog show, the community dog show, where kids would bring in their dogs and they had prizes for kind of goofy categories like longest ears or most waggiest tail, things like that. But on Sunday, and this is the day that Pamela Travers is going over there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Main Street, they have a traditional Easter parade. And this would have involved antique automobiles, like a car show, that are owned by local people, some of them whom work for the studio. It would have involved hundreds of people dressing up in turn of the century period costume. They would have had young girls pushing doll prams, so like little carriages with their dolls inside of them. Some of the younger boys would ride three-wheel bikes. Some of the bigger boys would ride big wheel bikes, so the bikes that have that really big front wheel. Some of the others would ride tandem bikes, so there would be this display of turn of the century culture on a street that's also key to that same period. Pamela's supposed to show up for lunch, so I think that Walt's processing this like, okay, so they could be a little late, but if they get there at 1, they're still going to be in the right section of the park, so that Pamela, all on her own, can see like, oh, coincidentally, we did this whole kind of turn of the century thing with costumes and cars and bikes and props and everything, so she can start to get the idea of what Disney is capable of. So this really some smart bits of manipulation that are going on between these two figures, and the film kind of lost some of the Saving Mr. Banks film kind of lost some of these elements, and I think some of these little details are really interesting.
Yeah, I really enjoyed some of those little anecdotes that were in there, especially about how really describing, like you said, these two really dynamic personalities, and how there was a real concerted effort to minimize their interaction at various points. And like you said, on top of everything else, the Sherman Brothers can't put anything in a contract or anything like that either. So there's all of this this nuance to this kind of dance that's going on there. That's honestly, one of my favorite things about the book is how you get into some of that nuance. But I'm curious, are there any parts of this book or sections that are favorites of yours that either you had a lot of fun writing, a lot of fun researching? I know it's kind of like trying to choose a favorite child, but is there anything that when you talk about this book, or you're preparing to talk about this book, this is one of the first things that comes to your mind?
So I'd known about all the Pamela Travers stuff for a while, and I had audio recordings of some of it too, and some of it's crazy. But the thing that I didn't know before I really started researching this book was the actress Glynis Johns, who eventually plays Mrs. Banks in the movie. I didn't know that when she came into the studio to talk about being in the movie, I didn't know that she had somehow thought that they were actually interviewing her to be the lead role, Mary Poppins. That brought me actually a lot of laughter, how that was handled. They all figure it out at the same time. They're having lunch with her, and it becomes immediately clear that Glynis Johns thinks that they would like her to be the lead in the movie. And what they really want her to do is to have a very small role in the movie. And over lunch, that role suddenly becomes larger. The song Sister Suffragette was never going to be in the movie. They just needed to kind of convince Glynis Johns that her part was going to be really kind of large and almost kind of like Mary Poppins in the movie, with her own song and everything. And so there's no song when they're having this interview, and it gets the Sherman Brothers actually take a song that they had worked on for another part of the movie that wasn't being used and come up with new lyrics for it, and that becomes Sister Suffragette. It's put together very quickly. But that whole sequence, as I was finding out about it, really made me laugh.
Oh yeah, you can almost imagine or feel the that kind of like dread, that sinking feeling that they
Yeah.
all must have been having sitting around that table as, oh no. And then wondering exactly how this is, how Walt's going to handle this, and how everybody is going to kind of navigate through this really awkward situation.
Yeah. So multiple people in interviews talk about how they're going to navigate through. At least in my mind, though they didn't talk about this, and also not in the book, but just speculating here, I do imagine there was a previous beat before that where they all thought, is this my fault? Was it me who said the wrong thing that set up this misunderstanding? And then after that, they kind of have this look around the table over whose job is it here now to clean up this mess?
Well, for people who are picking up this book, when you were writing it and thinking about who was going to be reading this, was there anything that you were hoping that people would end up taking away? Is there anything specific that you hope to convey to people when they go out and buy this book and sit down to read it cover to cover in a very short amount of time, because it's terrific and really hard to put down?
Thank you so much. So, to answer your question, so when I imagine like audiences for things like this that I write, I like to think that I'm part of the audience too. Like, I think that we're all over here together and we are interested in this movie. But I had some time and some ability to go out and spend some time with people who worked on it and do some other research in archives and elsewhere for it, and then to put together this thing. But I really think that, the audience for this is, a big group of us, including me. Um, so I really feel, I really want to feel like a kinship, that we're all in this together, essentially. And what I'd like people to take away from this is mostly that the next time they see the movie Mary Poppins, that they have a sense that they understand a little bit more of it, how it was put together, and they feel a little more closeness to this film up there on the screen that they like. So what I'd like this book to do is to bring people into a space where they're able to enjoy something they've already enjoyed on a slightly deeper level.
All right. Well, the book again is Making Mary Poppins, and it will be available on the 11th.
On the
Did I have
11th,
that correctly? Am I?
Yep.
All
It's
right.
the 11th.
And
Yes.
so, tell me, how can people find more about you, about this book, and where they can buy it on the 11th or any day thereafter?
So you can order it any place you order books. You can find it at major chains. You can find it on Amazon. It's up there for pre-order right now. There's a hardback, a Kindle, and an audio book version. The audiobook version is read by Al Kessel, who does a great job. He's read the last two books that I've put out as well. And you can find me at my personal website, which is www.toddjamespierce.com.
All right. So you mentioned in the past you've worked on some different projects concurrently. Is there anything else that you're working on or that you've set your sights on at this point?
So I do have a podcast. I hope that's okay to mention here. I do have a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do I do this unusual thing. On most podcasts are like normal, like people come on and have conversations. On my podcast, it's just me. And so each week I write about 5,000 words. And each year I take on one large topic. And maybe half the episodes for that year are on that large topic, and the other half are mostly standalone episodes. And so this past year, the topic that I took on was I finally had enough material. I finally had letters, bits of diaries, lots of interviews about Mary Blair, who was a key designer at Disney in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and even moving into Disney World in the early 70s. She does a lot of uncredited things for the Polly, in addition to her very well-known work over at the Contemporary. Um, and so what I tend to do with that is, over years, really, I kind of collect up the material. Then I make very long outlines. So the outline for this is about 150 pages, which is mostly just quotes in terms of how things are going to be structured. So I know exactly where I'm going. So I'm not doing this blind. And then after that, I start to put together what I think of as like a third draft for something that may or may not become a book. And over on the podcast, which is called Disney History Institute, you can find it just by typing in DHI podcast. We are up to part 20 on the life of Mary Blair. So part 20 or chapter 20, it's been going on for about a year. And so we're up into the mid 60s. So we're into a lot of, for the parks people, we're up into a lot of key Mary Blair parks related projects. Her most famous film related projects were late 40s and early 50s, and those were maybe 10 episodes ago. But there's probably like 6 or 7 episodes left to go, something like that. I hope to finish by the new year. We'll see.
Very cool. I'm looking forward to diving into that. I've got some catching up to do, it sounds like, and I look forward to I look forward to finding out more and more. So I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you very much. Thank you for writing this book. I have a deeper appreciation for Mary Poppins, which is one of my favorite movies. I was at an age where, VHS was a thing, so it was something that watched a lot. So, having that deeper appreciation for how all of this came together and the significance of so much that went into this, I just loved it. I absolutely loved this book. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me on. It was nice to be here.
Well, as Todd mentioned, the way that Pamela Travers is shown going to Disneyland with Walt Disney in Saving Mr. Banks never actually happened. But your dream Disney vacation can happen with the help of We Do Travel Right. Because We Do Travel Right offers that concierge level service that will help you plan out everything that you need for your vacation. You get that one-on-one service of an agent, but that agent has a team behind them, and that team is working for you, getting you those reservations, to the dining, to getting your park tickets, to making sure that you understand how the app works, and everything in between. I just got a great list in my email from We Do Travel Right about a bunch of great seminars that are coming up that can help you maximize the fun that you have on your Disney vacation. And the best part about all these kinds of services is they are free. Yeah, you do not pay We Do Travel Right a single penny, because Disney and Universal or cruise lines or all-inclusives, they all build the cost of using an agent into their pricing. So you're paying for the agent whether you're using it or not. So doesn't it just make sense to use the agent? So you can go to wedotravelright.com/Maza. That's wedotravelright.com/MAZA. Fill out the information to get your free, obligation-free quote and get your next magical vacation started today.
Now I can't do any more damage around this popsicle stand.
So long, partner.
See you real soon.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I thought that this was a great conversation. I'm so very appreciative to Todd for taking the time to talk with me about this. And yeah, look up the book. It's coming out on the 11th, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. It's Making Mary Poppins, the Sherman Brothers, Walt Disney, and the creation of the classic film. It's really terrific. It's an easy read. It's a fairly quick read. So especially if you're an enthusiast, and you don't have to be a Disney enthusiast at all. If you're someone who just likes good storytelling, he does a great job of humanizing some of these Disney legends, really, from Walt Disney on down to the Sherman Brothers and some of the other people who were involved with this film that really changed the Disney company. All right. Well, again, thank you to James. I appreciate it. And I also appreciate you for listening. And if you'd like to help us out, you can tell your friends about it. Word of mouth is the best way to let more people know about this podcast and to help this community we're building grow. Outside of that, you can leave a rating or a review on your favorite podcatcher. And if you do that, it will help boost us up in the algorithms that make us more visible to more people. So there's another way that people can discover us. You can also share our social media. We're at the Maza's Musings podcast on Facebook. We're on X, Twitter, Instagram, and Threads at Maza's Musings Pod. We're on TikTok at Maza's Musings Podcast. We have a YouTube page, so go and subscribe there. And we also have a Blue Sky. So we're kind of all over the place. I'd also love it if you went and visited our website, mazasmusings.wordpress.com. While you're there, you can find past episodes, you can find more information about me and this podcast, and you can find out how you can help us celebrate our 100th episode. Now, this episode was 97, so we're closing in. So if you want to help us out by either sending in a note or recording an audio greeting, there's a link and information on how to do that right there on the website. You can also send a video clip if that floats your boat. We'd love to have you and incorporate you into this celebration, and we appreciate any way that you can do that. While you're on the website, you can also sign up for our newsletter, where you'll get little nuggets on things that are coming up with the podcast, things you might have missed, and also some fun and interesting things. Sometimes it's sweepstakes. This week, I told you about a perk that you can get if you are a Disney Plus member that I just learned about just now, just this past week. And while you're there, if you're looking to support us just a little bit more, you can buy us blue milk. And buying us a blue milk is a way to, give us a small boost, obligation-free, to help with some of the small costs that go into putting this podcast together. And whether you are buying us blue milk or it's your first time listening, I appreciate all of the support. And I hope you keep listening. I hope you have a great weekend and a great week. Podcast is brought to you by Hi Dad Soup. Check them out at Mickey and Minutes on Instagram.